Can a man get pregnant? That all depends on your definition of man and pregnant and can and get and a. And what exactly is a question mark? Men cannot get pregnant was trending on Twitter, and it was trending in all caps, so you know people really meant it. The latest backlash against pregnant men erupted after Senator Josh Hawley collided with UC Berkeley law professor Khiara Bridges at a Senate hearing about the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Professor Bridges described the impact of the ruling on people with a capacity for pregnancy. Senator Hawley asked what she meant by that.
You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Maybe if you're a senator during the Eisenhower administration, Senator Hawley. But here in 2022, it's a brave new world.
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
Notice, since women are no longer the only people with a capacity for pregnancy, the abortion debate is no longer about a woman's right to choose. So Senator Hawley asks what the right is. And that's when he finds out that he's basically calling for genocide.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence.
That escalated quickly. Hey, if we're no longer talking about a woman's right to choose because men can get pregnant too, then what right are we talking about? Asking that question is transphobic, and you're promoting violence against trans people.
And it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
Yep.
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
I find these discussions fascinating. If this is no longer a woman's right, what's the right? You're being transphobic and causing violence against trans people. How does my question about what we're talking about cause violence? 1 in 5 trans people have attempted suicide. Notice, when she says that his line of questioning leads to violence against trans people, she means self-inflicted violence. If you ask these kinds of questions, trans people will kill themselves.
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist
I'm
is
denying that
dangerous.
trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
And now she corners him.
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So
pregnant.
you're denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this?
So, Professor Bridges believes men can get pregnant. Senator Hawley doesn't believe men can get pregnant. Who's right here? Well, they're both right. They're just using 2 different definitions of the word man. Senator Hawley is defining the word man in a traditional sense. Can a man, as the vast majority of people have used the term for thousands of years, get pregnant? No. Obviously no. Professor Bridges is defining the word man in a way that includes people who are biologically women but who identify as men. Can someone who is biologically a woman but who identifies as a man get pregnant? Yes, obviously yes. So, given their respective definitions of certain words, they're both correct. What we're seeing in these increasingly ridiculous discussions, then, is a war over words. It's as if both sides are convinced that if they can make their definitions of certain words stick, they win the culture war. Now, to be fair to both sides, there are times when we'd like to expand the definition of a word, and there are times when we don't want to expand the definition of a word. Suppose we find a tribe somewhere, and that tribe has a word that means human being, but the tribe only applies their word for human being to members of their own tribe. They don't apply the word to other people. Here we would probably think it's a good idea for them to expand the meaning of the word so that it includes all people. But we wouldn't want to keep expanding the word beyond that. We wouldn't want to apply the word for human being to chimpanzees, for instance, because if we expand the meaning of the word for human being so that it includes non-human beings, we've just ruined the word for human being. Once you've expanded the meaning of human being so that it includes non-human beings, what do you then call human beings? Do we come up with another word for human beings who really are human beings? So we've got words like man and woman, and we're being told that we need to expand the definitions to include people who don't fit the traditional definitions. The word man now has to include trans men. But there's a difference between a trans man and a non-trans man. So if the word man now refers to both trans men and non-trans men, what word should we use to refer specifically to non-trans men? Do we have to invent a new word? If we're going to invent a new word, why not just invent a new word that refers to the broader category, but continue using the word man in the traditional sense? Apparently, we can't do that, because if we do, people will slash their wrists.
1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
Because of
for
my
us-
line of questioning? So
Because-
we can't talk about it?
Isn't this interesting? You may think that this is a new development, that generations before ours didn't have these disputes. But let's read a passage from G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton was making fun of the BBC for censoring some controversial comments from George Bernard Shaw. But then Chesterton started talking about skepticism and how skepticism went from skepticism of supernatural claims to skepticism of moral claims to skepticism of totally ordinary claims. The BBC has broadcast any number of speeches on any number of subjects on which it is quite impossible for anyone to speak without expressing opinions that are widely controverted. But the case grows worse and worse every day as more and more principles come, in practice, to be controverted. For the secular society of today is skeptical not merely about spiritual assumptions, but about its own secular assumptions. It has not merely broken the church window or besieged the tower of tradition, it has also kicked away the ladder of progress by which it had climbed. The Declaration of Independence, once the charter of democracy, begins by saying that certain things are self-evident. If we were to trace the history of the American mind from Thomas Jefferson to William James, we should find that fewer and fewer things were self-evident, until at last, hardly anything is self-evident. So, far from it being self-evident to the modern man that men are created equal, it is not self-evident that men are created, or even that men are men. They are sometimes supposed to be monkeys muddling through a transition stage before the Superman. But there is not only doubt about mystical things, not even only about moral things. There is most doubt of all about rational things. I do not mean that I feel these doubts, either rational or mystical, but I mean that a sufficient number of modern people feel them to make unanimity an absurd assumption. Reason was self-evident before pragmatism. Mathematics were self-evident before Einstein. But this skepticism is throwing thousands into a condition of doubt, not about a cult, but about obvious things. We shall soon be in a world in which a man may be howled down for saying that 2 and 2 make 4, in which furious party cries will be raised against anybody who says that cows have horns, in which people will persecute the heresy of calling a triangle a 3-sided figure, and hang a man for maddening a mob with the news that grass is green. People will persecute the heresy of using the traditional definition of a triangle. They'll hang someone for saying that grass is green. Chesterton wrote this in 1926, almost 100 years ago. He predicted a war against the obvious, a war against the self-evident, a war against the rational. And here we are, ready to burn civilization to the ground over some pronouns. Now, I'm not the babysitter of the English language. As far as I'm concerned, you can use words however you want. You can change definitions all day long. As long as you're willing to deal with some temporary confusion over what you mean, I do not care. You can change the definitions of common words. You can invent new words. You can invent your own language. You can speak your own mix of Klingon and Dothraki. D. Wood does not care. However, the people who are redefining words every 15 minutes seem oddly obsessed with forcing everyone to go along with their latest redefinitions. It's not, hey, here's how we're using the word now, the rest of you can use it however you want. Instead, it's, hey, here's how we're using this word now, and if you don't use it this way too, then you're making trans kids hang themselves. This do what we want or kids will die approach has the same vibe as a man who finds out that his girlfriend is leaving him, and so he says to her, "You can't leave me. If you leave me, I'll kill myself," as if his suicide would be her fault for not doing what he wanted. Notice, that man could define himself as someone who's in a relationship with his girlfriend, so that by breaking up with him, she would be denying his existence and causing him to kill himself. That would take some mental and moral gymnastics, wouldn't it? But here we are, being told by college professors that if we don't change the way we use words, we're denying the existence of trans people and causing mass suicides. Listen, when someone says, unless everyone changes how they use words, I'm going to kill myself, the response should be, well, everyone's not going to change how they use words, but you shouldn't kill yourself because of how people use words. We tell little kids to memorize the rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. But we're telling a generation of trans kids that if they kill themselves, it's other people's fault for not adopting the latest terminology. Keep in mind, there are kids who are relentlessly bullied. That's not just true of trans kids. There are a lot of mean people in this world. Sometimes kids are bullied until they decide that they'd rather die than put up with it. Being bullied like that is horrible. But to equate harassing and bullying kids with saying, I don't believe men can get pregnant, is idiotic and insane, even for a UC Berkeley college professor. In fact, since college professors won't say it, I'll go ahead and say it. To any trans kids or trans adults who are watching, Senator Josh Hawley is probably never going to agree with your definitions of the words boy, girl, man, woman, and so on. He may never agree with your chosen pronouns. But you should never, ever kill yourself over people disagreeing with you. Don't ever give people that kind of power over your life. Any college professor or journalist or politician who tells other people that they're causing you to commit suicide by not adopting this week's edition of the Transgender Dictionary is not helping you. These professors and journalists and politicians aren't helping you. They're using you to silence critics of their ideas. And if they can't win an argument without using the threat of your suicide to silence their critics, how good do you think their arguments really are?